amazing Australians and the story of their lives. You're tuned to Lots to Chat About with Rosemary Peterswald.
Hello listeners, and welcome once again. Today we've got a slightly different programme. A couple of weeks ago, Sallyanne Atkinson and I packed our bags and headed to the outback for the Winton Splendid Film Festival. And what a great 4 days it was. David Wenham, the actor, was there, who we hope to have come in and chat to us soon about his fun new movie Spit, a follow-on from the 2003 film Getting Square. And the lovely Delvine Delaney and Victoria Baldock were promoting their fabulous new movie, documentary, The Love of an Icon, detailing the making of the iconic movie Crocodile Dundee, and also a tribute to Delvine's late husband, John Cornell, otherwise known as Strop from The Paul Hogan Show, but also the man behind Crocodile Dundee and Paul Hogan's great mate. There were other terrific films which Sallyanne and I will talk about. And as I had never been to Winton before, and many of you may not have been, we will tell you all about this wonderful outback town, famous for its opals. And of course, I had to have one as a remembrance, which I've got on my finger. Welcome, Sallyanne.
Thank you, Rosemary. Great to be here and great to be able to share memories of Winton and the journey and what it's famous for. It's a great Australian iconic town.
It certainly is, and we found that out. But Sallyanne, tell me, how did you? How did you first get involved, and how did the Winton Film Festival first start?
Well, two questions there.
Yes.
How did I get involved? When I was at boarding school and my parents lived overseas in Sri Lanka, I used to stay with the friends whose parents had a property at a place called Boulia, yes, west of Winton, and we used to fly into Winton and have lunch at the famous North Gregory Hotel, which was an experience. Back in the day when, wool was king, pound to pound, and the waitresses were in frilly caps and things. Anyhow, that's another story in itself. So we would stay there, and I just developed, to me, that was outback Australia. I'd never been out west before, never been in the bush before, a wonderful experience that I've remembered all my life. And then many years later, about 40 years ago, 30 years ago, I was chairman of Queensland Tourism, and I was invited to the opening of the Wolsey Matilda Centre at Winton, which is a museum dedicated to our very famous song, Wolsey Matilda. Many people think it's Australia's alternate national anthem. It should be our national anthem, but we won't go there. Perhaps
I must admit, I agree.
Yeah,
yes.
Well, that's a big discussion in itself. But anyhow, so this museum is the only museum probably in the whole world dedicated to a song. And the song was written way back in the 1890s by Banjo Patterson. Anyhow, so I was there in a particular role. But of course I fell in love with Winton again, and then they asked me to be on the board of the Wolsey Matilda Centre, so I said yes, and in fact I only stepped down at the end of last year after about 20 years, which is far too long in good governance terms, but I loved it so much.
And you became then involved in the film festival?
Well, then the film festival was actually started 10, 12 years ago, I haven't got that number quite right, but by a chap called Clive Kitchen, who ran the very famous the North Gregory Hotel, which used to have the waitresses in frilly caps and aprons and things, but no longer did then. Back then, when Clive bought it, it had sort of lino on the floor. Couldn't believe it was the same place. I kept saying, no, this is not the North Gregory. Yeah. Yes, it is. And then I saw these wonderful Daphne Mayo sculptures. Daphne Mayo, who was a very famous, in her day, Brisbane sculptress, and did the tympanum on the top of City Hall, and she did the glass blasted doors in the North Gregory Hotel. So I knew I was in the right place.
And they're terrific. Well, you showed me those when we were there. Yes,
just beautiful. That's what I'm saying. It's a town with so much in it and happening. And anyhow, so said, would I be on the Film Festival board? And yes, I was and am. And so I've stepped down from the Wolsey Matilda Centre and now am diverting myself, dedicated my energies and my time in Winton to the Film Festival.
But Sallyanne, now, unlike me, who flew to Winton, you drove. And I'm actually now looking at an article that you wrote for The Australian many, many years ago.
211, actually. That was the first time I did the drive.
Yes, so tell us now, because you talk about all the places that you visited on that drive in 2011, and this year you took off in your car again, and you drove, and it's a good 15, 16-hour drive. So just tell us a little bit about that and where you stop on the way.
That in 211, or
2011.
2011, sorry. I drove by myself, and that was a great experience. But this time I drove with a friend, which was an even better experience, and reassured my children that I was going to be safe. I also took my dog this time, and so I was definitely safe from any muggers or would-be murderers.
With little Pappy in the back.
Little Pappy in the back would munch up any would-be murderer instantly. But so we drove from Brisbane to Roma the first day, and I've got some good friends, and Joan and Bruce Scott we've got a place outside Roma, so we stayed there for the night. That was somebody I was at school with, and then we drove north up to Emerald and then straight west, and the drive from Roma to Emerald is through the Carnarvon National. You see all that wonderful scenery, and it's just fantastic. The first time I drove, I stayed overnight at the In-June pub. I was the only person in the hotel without a high-vis vest.
Oh, really?
I wanted to go and get one so I could just fit in.
Yeah.
Anyhow, then you drive from Emerald, I say left if I was going up the road, but west through places like Ruby Vale and Anarchy and all these mining gem places. Ruby Vale's a bit off the road, but through Jericho, which has a collection of wonderful statues to do with the Battle of Jericho, which we remember from our Bible studies upbringing, to Ilfracombe, to Barcaldine, Ilfracombe, Longreach, which has got some great museums there, and then the 2 hours to Winton, and then coming back, we came another much quicker way, Longreach, Barcaldine, Blackall, Tambo, and then where do we go? Anyhow, straightforward.
Back into Brisbane.
Roma and back into Brisbane.
The outback is incredible, isn't it? My grandson, actually, Hubert, he suddenly texted me last week or over the weekend and said that he was right in the outback, and he was driving actually from Sydney through to Adelaide, and said, of course, he went through. He said, "Gosh, through towns that there's literally 2 people living in it, 3 people or whatever," and it's an area that many of Australians, including I have to say myself, haven't seen a lot of. But for me, Winton was an absolute eye-opener, flying in and seeing the miles and miles and miles of sunburned country. It was absolutely mind-boggling. But Sallyanne, now tell me, who sort of else is involved in the festival, and how do you choose the films that are, and the people that are going to come there to talk?
I'm on the board, so we don't choose. We just make sure that everybody who's choosing films is doing it all properly.
Yes.
And, the important thing, of course, is to get stars, people who mean something to the... it's a bit of a double thing, in fact, the film festival. So first of all, it's a film festival, and I'm really wanting to push it as, the centre of outback filmmaking, and somewhere where people should, come to make films, and somewhere where people can go to look at films, because we show Australian films, and many of which don't reach the major cinemas anyhow. Yes, so there are lots of interesting people that you meet and talk to.
And there were a lot of young ones there.
At the film festival,
yes, I was amazed how many young people were there, which was terrific.
Yes, well, a lot of them are students from Griffith University. Griffith University has a film school.
Yes.
And back in the beginning of the film festival, we used to get an awful lot because there were Indian students there were American students. Well, at the moment there are not so many international students at universities as we would like, but they come out and they make documentaries and they make films, and the film school. It's not just about what we see in the cinema. It's about all the backroom stuff that happens to make a film. So you can learn to be a director, you can learn about lighting, you can learn about costume, all of that. And it's great for those young people, because the outback is something of a myth to many Australians. As you say, not every Australian has been there. But I think we all rather fancy ourselves as that's our spiritual home. We're
Yes.
all Chips Raffertys leaning on the fence post and, thinking this is our wide brown land, and this is because we've been brought up on poems, on Banjo Patterson's poetry and Dorothea McKellar's poetry.
Exactly.
But most Australians live in cities, and we're one of the most urbanised countries in the entire world.
Yes, yes. But Sallyanne, now I'd never really, apart from when we lived in Papua New Guinea many, many years ago in the 1960s, I'd never really sat in an outside theatre before. And of course, Winton is one of only two, isn't it?
That's right.
And the other one, of course, is in Broome. So that was quite an experience, wasn't it, for you and I?
It is an experience, and I have actually been to the Broome one as well. Broome claims it's the oldest one. I don't know. I'm not getting into that because I don't actually know.
Yes.
But the Winton one is certainly, from the original days, and it's a lovely experience to sit and look at the stars. And
It was fabulous.
Yes,
Yeah.
but a bit
And not that cold, wasn't that cold?
no, this time it wasn't too cold. Although the morning we were in Tambo, it was 3 degrees. I mean, I'm a hot weather person. I don't actually like the cold, but and one year it was very cold in the outback film in the theatre.
Yep.
I have never been so cold in my life.
Really?
Rugs all over me, and yeah.
No, I was surprised because a friend of mine offered me a huge big coat that she wears in the snow, and I was very relieved I didn't take it because it actually was really quite warm. Now, Winton, of course, is known for the Dinosaur Museum, which we talked a little bit about before, but that's an incredible story in itself, isn't it? I mean, can you tell me how about that? A local sort of, I can't say a farmer because he has a huge property, hasn't he?
A grazier. Yeah.
A grazier.
Yes.
That's the word I need, grazier.
Yes, a farmer to me is somebody who grows
Yep.
crops,
Yep.
much further in towards the coast. Yes, David Elliott, accidentally, found dinosaur footprints, and there are
Yes.
dinosaur footprints all over Western Queensland, Richmond and Cloncurry, I think, and, all those. So back, my natural history isn't quite as good as it ought to be, so I can't even remember. And you might remember because you went and looked at the dinosaurs.
I did.
But anyhow, no, it is absolutely fascinating.
Well, I looked at their bones. They weren't real. The bones were real.
The bones were real.
But they weren't a real big dinosaur.
No. Yes, the big,
I'm only joking,
big dinosaurs.
yeah.
Yes, well, the big dinosaurs have long gone, and even little dinosaurs have long gone.
Exactly.
But they have lovely, films, and we did see a film there, which was a bit sort of grueling. I mean, it was about something to do with the Vietnam War. I couldn't understand it actually.
They came across. Because
Your husband, of course,
listeners, yes, Rob was in Vietnam and my brother was in Vietnam. But this particular movie was made about actually the soldiers, American soldiers, for some reason, and they didn't just come across Viet Cong. Of course, they came across huge, big dinosaurs. So that was a little bit not controversial, but it was a bit different. There were films of all sorts, weren't they?
Yes,
because
yes.
I'll just say that quickly to our listeners that I'm talking to my friend Sallyanne Atkinson, who came, I went with her to the Winton Film Festival, and Splendid.
Properly called the Vision Splendid Outback Film Festival. I like things to be simple. I would prefer to call it the Outback Film Festival because I don't know that everybody understands, the Vision Splendid, the poem about, the Vision Splendid and Clancy of the Overflow and, all of that. But anyhow, it doesn't matter. That's what it is.
It's a film festival in Winton, and it was just a fabulous 4 days. Now, one of the films...
Just before you leave that, sorry, because I might forget if I don't say it now, is next year we're looking at expanding to... we had a couple of days in Longreach before we went on. It's always been in Winton, but now we're thinking, there'll be other towns who are now saying, well, could we have a bit too? So we're looking at going to Longreach. And then this morning I got an email from our chairman, Trevor Love, saying that Mount Isa has expressed an interest.
Oh, how wonderful.
So, yes, so I don't know how that'll all happen, but anyhow, it's fantastic that the actors and the do you say actress now?
Yeah.
They're all called actors. Anyhow, that they all want to go there and love it. And David Wenham was carrying on about, what a wonderful time, because lots of them have been in films about the outback, but they've never actually been there because quite often, their bits are not not filmed there. They're filmed in the studio, and the scenery's all used and stuff. So we've had so many
that wanted to be part of it. And we're hoping that David Wenham shall be our guest.
We shall insist that he is.
He was very enthusiastic to do that, as Delvine Delaney is a possibility. And she's hopefully getting Delvine, but of course they have busy schedules, so we need to fit in there. But Sallyanne, one of the movies or documentaries, which I was fascinated by and you were involved in, was Aquarius. Now that was set down in Nimbin. So tell us about that.
Well, I don't know. I'm sure many of your listeners will remember hearing about the Nimbin Festival, and in fact may have even been there. But this was a festival in 1973. It was just about the beginning of the time of, students protesting in the streets, about Vietnam, I think, mainly, but and the exploration of alternate lifestyles. And this group of students had been looking for somewhere to have where they could have a festival, a celebration of alternate lifestyle, and they looked in lots of places. But in northern New South Wales, there was this dairy town called Nimbin, and I think the dairy industry was...
very quiet little laid-back town before it all happened, wasn't it?
I don't think they quite knew what they were getting. And there they suddenly, all these people arrived. And in fact, funnily, this very morning, I happened by chance to bump into Larry Anthony, who was the son of Doug Anthony, former Deputy Prime Minister and leader of the National Party, who happened to be the local federal member. And Larry was saying again this morning how he and his brother, Dougal, their eyes were out on stalks when Doug, as the local federal member, had to go down there. Larry seems to think he might have opened it. I don't know where they opened it. But anyhow, I remember Doug and Margot in her pretty cotton dress. But Larry and his brother, Dougal, they were all these naked ladies.
Yes.
And there was a man, which I'd forgotten.
And men.
Well, they were looking at the ladies. And he said, you remember, which I hadn't until he reminded me, the chap who was a tightrope walker who walked on a tightrope across from two trees wearing nothing but a bowler hat.
Oh, how lovely.
And so, of course, there was a bit of outrage and people saying, these terrible people, this is all so wicked. But I think it made a huge difference to Australian society. People suddenly recognising that there is other ways of living and, eating good food and natural health. And that particular, at that time, it came to a bit of a sad end. The police came in and it was, there were all sorts of Cedar Bay up in North Queensland and lots of things going on. But I think it was very important. But anyhow, the movie was a sort of rerun of, or a remake, if you like, of an original movie which was made in 1973 or 4 by a group of Queensland University students. And I was asked, I couldn't work out why somebody had contacted me and said, could you come and talk to us about this movie? And because they had discovered that my husband and I, or then husband and I, were donors, sponsors of the festival, which seemed to me a most extraordinary thing, because I can't imagine why did we know what it was. I did by the time it was happening. But anyhow, so one of the students they were social work students from UQ making this as an assignment, would you believe, making that original movie. Yeah. And one of them, Anthony Lupi, as he's sort of put himself through university, was working as an orderly at the Holy Spirit Hospital.
Oh, right.
And he must have grabbed Lee's ear and had a big chat to him about, all of this. And anyhow, we put money into it. So there you go. So that was what they were again. But anyhow, I didn't put any money into it. Didn't this time.
But it was fascinating. Where is it showing, Sallyanne? Because it was fascinating.
And I must find out.
I will find out, and I'll let our listeners know.
And also the one, Delvine's movie about...
that's in the theatres.
Is that in theatres?
Yes, Love of an Icon is in the theatres.
Right. And it really was terrific, because one of the points that Delvine made, and she'll make it again when she comes in to talk to you, is that she always felt that her husband, John Cornell, who we know as Strop, never got the credit for his achievements in the way that Paul Hogan was sort of the famous one.
I agree, yes.
And John was very happy. He was a modest and humble person, and he had lots of business interests. He owned all those pubs in in northern New South Wales, Byron and the Brunswick Hotel and things.
Yes.
So, this wasn't his only
He was
gig,
often,
if you like.
often regarded as sort of the brains behind it.
I think he obviously was.
Yes, exactly. But just, we're very much looking forward, hopefully, to talking to Delphine or Victoria, who was the producer in the making the film with her. So we hope that happens. But just quickly going back to Aquarius, something you and I commented, which was interesting, because there were, as we said, a lot of naked bodies and whatever, but they were all so slim, weren't they? We're talking 1973, wasn't it?
Yes.
I don't know whether we were healthier eating at that stage. There might have been a bit of sort of drug taking and whatever, but everybody looked so fit and slim and beautiful, didn't they, really?
Yes, and they were certainly skinny. And you think of people now, I mean, obesity is a national problem.
Yes.
And I think it's, that's not all that long ago, but we were not eating processed food. I mean, I gave my children chops and potatoes and peas every night for
There was meat and 3 veg.
Literally every night for dinner, because I didn't have much of imagination for cooking. But yes, we ate ordinary food, which we cooked ourselves.
Unprocessed.
Unprocessed. And if you look around now, the kids from school tuck shops have a terrible battle trying to give the
sausage
kids
rolls and
health.
McDonald's and whatever. But that was interesting that it really jumped out at me.
Good on you for observing it, I guess.
Sallyanne, recently I watched a documentary that you were involved in on Stan, which was about Joe Bajelke-Peterson. That was a really interesting time, because at that stage you were Lord Mayor and Joe was the Premier. And what you said, which I thought was interesting, is that he had great charisma.
Yes. Yeah. I have only seen 2 public figures with charisma, Joe and Bob Hawke.
Right.
And that those two men,
opposites totally politically.
Absolutely, but they could, Joe, who looked like a funny little man, he was small in stature, he wasn't anything particular, but he could walk into a room and everybody would know he was there. I don't know how you define charisma.
Yes.
And Bob Hawke was exactly the same. I can remember he came to open a CWA national conference in City Hall, and I had to go and greet him at the front door, dressed in all the robes and things. And there was quite a bit of a hostility in the air. Some of the women said to me beforehand, why is he asked to do this? I said, because he's the Prime Minister of Australia, that's why. And as we were walking down the hall up to the stage, I could sort of feel, this. But once he was on the stage, and the first thing he said was, "Oh, Sally, this is a nice place you've got here." And I could see the ladies going, "Oh." And when we walked out, women were wanting to touch him.
Really?
He had just turned, and then again, I saw that in evidence again when we went out to a boys' school, Morris Brothers Ashgrove. And for the kids all wanting. And it was not just that he was Prime Minister for, schoolboys, that's not. It was just something he had.
Yes.
It's a magic thing. And as I said, I don't know how you define it. I don't know what it is.
Yeah. And you felt Joe had that very much the same.
Absolutely, had the same thing, yes.
He came from sort of, I can't say humble place, but Bethany was a property in the outback pretty much, isn't it? And I recently saw some photos of it and whatever. It was lovely, it's charming, but, it wasn't sort of, immense or whatever.
It was an ordinary country house. Yes. Yes, I mean, this was, I said in that when they asked me to be honoured, to do that documentary, I was pleased because there is so much anti-Joe sentiment around. Yes. Lots of it very uninformed, but I worked with Joe, obviously, in City Hall. When I was a few years before, he was Prime Minister, Premier, I think it was a few years before, I interviewed Flo, his wife. I drove up to Kingaroy to the farm, and that was a farm, and Flo then, nobody knew anything about Flo, but she was known locally as the real member for Baramba.
Right.
He was in Brisbane
with
doing
her pumpkin scones.
She wasn't famous for pumpkin scones then, but she was, she played the organ.
She had a brain.
She had a brain. She played the organ, and she was such a nice person. And in fact, we had recently moved into our first home. This must have been in the early 70s. And I was told I was trying to establish a garden. So at the end of I had done the interview and the photographer was with me, we went around and she got me some manure for my garden. The poor photographer was aghast. He had to put this bag of manure in the back of his car. But that was a sort of thoughtful, sort of nice, ordinary thing that she did. So I never found any evidence of corruption against her.
You say that in the documentary, which is great.
Well, I just felt that there needs to be a bit of a balance in what is said, because so many of the people who say, how bad Joe was, never talk about the good things that he did do for Queensland.
Well, a lot of people say he did a lot of good, including inheritance tax.
Yes. And that's why there was a mass migration to Queensland, because when he did away with death duties, a lot of people came up, right, okay, that's a good place to be. And as I said, I never saw any evidence, except for that sort of country thing where, a bit of bitumen on the road here and there for your friends. I find pretty harmless. It's what country people do for each other.
Well, it's actually interesting when you go on a road trip and you come to suddenly a beautiful bit of road, you do automatically say, well, a politician obviously lives here.
Yeah, something like that. Everywhere.
Well, Sallyanne, as normal, I could chat to you for a long, long time, but as Paul would tell you, we're running out of time, are we, Paul?
We are.
We are. But just to close up, the Winton Film Festival, which is what we came here to sort of discuss to begin with, it'll be on again next year. And at the similar sort of time in July?
Yes, we haven't finalised the dates, but it is on. It has always been on the last week of June and the first week of July, but it was only 1 week this year to coincide with school holidays. But we did notice this year there were not terribly many children.
No,
at it.
There were young ones, but they were sort of over school age.
Yes. So, but that's you have to. Everything has to evolve, and so the committee will meet in a couple of weeks, and then we'll decide what we want to do next year, and do we want to go to other places, and all of that. The Winton Council has been very generous and put money into the festival, so they deserve to be the top of the pops.
They certainly do. And as I said before, we do hope that we'll get David Wenham and Delvine Delaney on here before too long. And Sallyanne, as I say, once again, thank you so much for coming in and chatting with us. And Paul, thank you for producing.
No problem.
And this program has been recorded in the studios of 4RBH Reading Radio in Brisbane for syndication around Australia.
Great friends and great chats. That was another Lots to Chat About with Rosemary Peterswald. Stay tuned next week for another amazing chat.